really began in earnest some 50 years ago. And I suddenly realized when I was asked to do this presentation that I've been involved in this sector for just about that amount of time. And I also realized, and this presentation, this is Johnny Appleseed. You may not know who Johnny Appleseed was, but he was actually a young American who believed that planting apples was a great way to improve the country. So he packed seeds in his bag and he enthusiastically went around the country planting forests. And this is also Johnny Appleseed 50 years later, and I kind of like to see myself in this position. I haven't lost my enthusiasm for this sector, and I hope I can show that to you today. But I have to admit that as I get older, I'm getting more and more cynical about the fact that we talk a good game, but actual implementation lags far behind. And I think that's the case, as Jafar mentioned, when one talks about passing the message between the industry and academia. In my later days, I've been a visiting professor at a number of universities, and I've just got the feeling that we're teaching the old stuff to young people who have, and obviously one shouldn't generalize in that fashion, but for the most part, what I've seen is not related to the world that we're going to be in the second 50 years of tourism's existence. Now, you can see here, if your previously invited keynote speaker had been here, I have no doubt he would have given you all of these numbers. And frankly, for the most part, these are the numbers that we pulled together in the WTTC when we didn't have anything else in 1990. I was the first employee. And all we had was a report given to us by American Express, who were the people who were behind WTTC. And it was a report that they'd done at Wharton, and it kind of was the first attempt at a satellite account for travel and tourism. And it came at the same time as the UNWTO, or WTO as it then was beginning to develop the framework of satellite accounts. And today, if you look at WTTC's website and you look at WTO's pronouncements, you'll see that this is pretty much the same story. Of course, the numbers have increased, but the progression has been pretty linear. It's 1% above GDP, more or less. When the economy gets bad, tourism gets bad. When the economy picks up, tourism picks up. And you can see it doubles every 15 years or so. We have made a big point about pointing out why it is a force for good and why it is a poverty reducer. And I think we should be pleased with that, because before that, there was little recognition of the sector. It's taken 20 years of fighting for people to accept these numbers. And a point that I'm going to return to is we've only been dealing with half of the issue. I recall in 1999 standing up at a UNWTO meeting, my last year at WTTC, and I remember saying, why don't we use environmental satellite accounting? And everybody nodded and said, good idea. And 17 years later, finally, people are looking at the interaction of tourism satellite accounting and environment satellite accounting. People have been in their silos all this time. We also picked out a number of the big issues at that time. We didn't use the word over-tourism. We talked about limits to capacity. and the technology that we discussed at that time was certainly not the technology of today. And talk about carbon came maybe around the time of 2000. And you would find, if you look back on this period, that these issues that you see here, the demographics of tourism, globalization, you can read them there, those were the issues which almost every presentation and certainly every industry leader in one form or another picked up. We started to talk about the triple bottom line: economic, social, and environmental balance. And we measured travelers, we measured revenues, and we measured costs. And of course, at a micro level and in different places, people measured quite different aspects. People started to measure things and had been measuring things from a local perspective looking up. But globally, these were the figures that we were collecting, and these are the figures that you will see UNWTO, you will see IATA, you will see WTTC producing the time series around these issues. Now we're coming to a new time. The world order is changing. Action, decision-making, and above all, numbers is moving from the old world to a new world. It's moving to China, it's moving to the Asia-Pacific region, it's moving to Africa, and we are seeing disruption being not just recognized, but sought after. What is the next Airbnb? What is the next Uber? We've moved from a calmer, static state to one of where some form of chaos is what people seem to be looking for. And we could not have a better manifestation than a person who is threatening to turn our whole world upside down in Donald Trump, who lives by chaos theory as a basic way of life. And we're living in a time of populism, where popular initiatives, sometimes to very complex questions like, should we leave the European Union, yes or no, are being picked up by political leaders who, above all, want to keep power, rather than necessarily to do the thing which is right in the long term for countries. And we see a whole new world of challenges before us. The Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics, big data, blockchain, and with it a whole new opportunity for travel and tourism. Smart cities. Most tourists are going to cities, increasingly so. Electric vehicles, and then the sharing economy and the circular economy. This is going to be the future. And we have to deal with, to face up to, what everybody says is a blessing, and I'm sure it is, but it's reorchestrating the future of everything, of all production, all consumption, and all investment. There are 17 SDGs, 169 targets, 200 plus indicators, and the name of the game is to measure everything. Tourism, at least UNWTO, has selected 3 SDGs. There's no reason to just take 3 SDGs. It's probably because that's all they could handle. At the same time, the numbers we give touch every SDG. This is going to be both a blessing and a curse as we try to evaluate all of the numbers. And then we have a new paradigm. It's not just the SDGs. 3 summits in 2015, one in Addis, produced a new framework for development financing and the need for $100 billion a year by 2020 beyond existing development support. New York produced the SDGs and Paris produced the climate targets. And the climate targets are not a way step, they're a hard step. If we have to change our economies to get to 1.5 degrees, and it is 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees was the lowest common denominator that people could achieve, we have to change every aspect of our life. And as Naomi Klein said in her book, this changes everything. Currently, we're heading to 3 degrees. Now, it's easy to stand in front of you and talk about climate change and then move on to the next slide. But if, as we are told, climate change is existential, it is tapping at the planet's boundaries, it isn't just another issue, it's the issue. I've been saying for some time, and I will say it again here, if we don't fix it, our kids will freeze or fry, our grandchildren. And we don't have options if we don't fix it. This is the way the industry is dealing with it. We have a powerful aviation sector which has been in place since the rebirth of tourism after the war. IATA and ICAO are strong, well-organized organizations. We have the UNWTO, which was created in the 1970s and which later became the UN organization. We have WTTC, which was created in 1990. UNWTO really joined the UN system after 2000. And now we have a new group which tries to bring them all together called Uniting Travel. Uniting Travel has no academia and no NGOs. Uniting Travel is a group which is designed to perpetuate the past. It will look to the future on the terms of the people who are involved in it. The UN system introduces the concept of stakeholder groups. It's not just the academics which are not getting their points across, Jafar. It's the NGOs who, in the world of sustainable development, have been the real leaders of the change. And I think there are some big questions to be asked when Uniting Travel starts to put out solutions to the big challenges which may well be too self-serving and too slow. And we still don't have environment accounts. We have an agreed UNWTO framework, and it's necessary to have that framework. But check out how much budget, how much effort, how much real work is going in to the linking of tourism satellite accounts and environment satellite accounts. Until we do this, we will simply be repeating the old growth story without adding the green dimension to it. I want to finish by just talking about the work that I'm involved in, which is a work based on 25 years of friendship and mentorship by Maurice Strong, who was the father of sustainable development. We've created a transformation framework. We don't need more of the same. We need to change things radically. Our concept is to put cloud-connected climate resilience centres in every country by 2030. And this is the point of huge importance for the discussions here, 100,000 graduate climate champions. It's not just the professors and lecturers who are going to be the change agents by intersecting with the industry. It's the young people. They think differently, they act differently. Our kids are more sensitive and, to be honest, more decent than we are. We have to get them to help us to transform tourism. This is the kind of thing that we want to see people doing. We want to see people looking at how to make travel impactful, not just growth, but green growth. We want to see use of the masses of social media, multimedia, which is out there. Who do you want to have talking about climate change, me or Al Gore? You can get Al Gore for an hour, half an hour, 10 minutes. You can get Elon Musk talking about climate change to the Sorbonne in a 10-minute session the night before the Paris climate talk started. And we're not tapping into it. We're not making it available. And the amount of information which is outside our sector, the analytics, is enormous. And we have to capitalize on it. We have to think out of the box. I truly believe this is the key. It's not another form of ecotourism. This is how deep we have to start changing travel if we want it to meet the climate targets which have been set by the Paris Agreement. We have to intersect with the SDGs. We have to move on green growth, low carbon, inclusive, and with biodiversity as a base. And we have to factor in the kind of targets of Paris and the kind of technological change that you can only see if you go on the World Economic Forum's website and look at the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Benjamin Franklin said it better than I did. Donald Trump should take careful notice of it. Thank you.
I think we've got some challenges there. Let's have a look now from a government perspective. We have asked Robert Tico Cruz to fly all over and to give his experience in time of government. Robert Tico, which is his real name. It's not like Luisito or Mauricito, no. Robert Tico, so don't ask him. It is his real name. So Robert Tico is the former tourist minister of Aruba. And in conversations I've had with him, I think he's really changed the whole positioning of Aruba in the period he was in charge. He's currently the Associate Dean at the Rosen College of Hospitality Management of the University of Central Florida. And like I say, I believe is a man that has transformed tourism in Aruba, driving the direction of responsible tourism and creating a strategic plan which has been implemented, which in many cases don't happen. So for a man that has created quality tourism to his island, I would like your full attention and ask later how he did it. Please welcome Professor Robert Tico Cruz.
Good morning. I came to Mallorca as a scholar, and then 2 days ago I became a politician again. So it's been quite a transformation, and I have to admit, and this is prefacing this whole thing, I have to admit I had a terrible night last night because I had a nightmare of going back 20 years ago when I was a politician. So bear with me my next 15 minutes, which are going to be very difficult. First, because they asked me whether I would have slides. A politician never has slides. So that's number one. Second, they have asked me to only speak in 15 minutes. A politician never speaks in 15 minutes. You speak, that is, your only way to communicate and persuade in a democracy. So you speak a lot, and you talk a lot for many, many, many hours. But I promise I'll keep the 15 minutes. And finally, what I missed, I saw the Presidenta. She has an entourage. I don't have an entourage, which is very typical of politicians when you are an active politician. So I am from Aruba, and about 16 years ago, I had my last election. I lost the prime ministership, and I decided after 16 years it was time to step down and then to move to academia, where I thought as an applied economist I should go. And I got hired by University of Central Florida after a long thought of whether that would be the right decision for myself. And if you go today to the website of the Rosen College of the University of Central Florida, you will notice on my brief bio that I have nothing there which characterized me as a former politician. Only if you go to my resume, you click further on my resume, you will notice just 2 sentences. I was Minister of Tourism those years and Minister of Finance in those years. And the reason why is because of what Mr. Lippman just said. Academicians or people from these international organizations tend to look down at politicians. And that is something that when I went to the United States, I tried to hide because I wanted to start a new life, a new chapter, in order to make sure that people respect me based on my experience and my knowledge. And that is something that I think is one of the major barriers in crossing that bridge that I saw between academicians and politicians. Because you need to understand, like you understand the business of tourism, what motivates, the major motive of an entrepreneur is making money. If you do not understand that, you cannot help the entrepreneur. Because the entrepreneur knows how to deal with risk, and an academician doesn't. A politician's motive is to get power and stay in power. It is an important motivation. And it is also for good reason, because based on the power, you can, come up with a vision and implement that vision. When you talk about hope, you have to inspire people. So you use very simple language. And that is also something that sometimes the university or academicians do not understand, the simplicity of the language, because you have to connect. And you are a person who has to inspire a whole country. So you use words like hope, which is very constant in our language. It's a very different type of language that you use constantly, what distinguishes you from the university. So the country that I come from is a country was till 86 an oil refining country. We had 2 oil refineries, close to 1 million barrels per day. We had a country, an economy based on engineers. That is when I entered politics, because suddenly the oil industry just collapsed, and we had to make a very quick decision what would be the future. We had to move over 10,000 engineers towards a service economy. And Aruba is just arid. There's nothing. I saw oranges here. You cannot grow anything. So today, we use 7 miles of white powder beaches, and we created in Aruba a $1.6 billion industry with 1 million tourists, 12,000 rooms. They spend over $200 a day. And for each dollar that we spend in terms of marketing, we get at least $50 back. We have an HDI, a Human Development Index, of 0.9, a GDP per capita of over $30,000, a Gini coefficient of 36, universal health care, and free education for everybody. Of course, there's many problems because, I mean, managing a country is a journey. It never ends. It's like bliss. You just aspire, you expect, and you move towards bliss, but you will never get it. And that's the dynamics of a country. So the language becomes very, very important. One of the slogans that we used was a bright future, and we were criticized. Why did you use bright future? Because it's empty, there's no issues, nothing. Remember I said we have to connect to everybody. So instead, imagine if I have used the language as an academician would use. You would say, we have changed the epistemology of something. Nobody would understand that. But basically what we change is, instead of the technicians telling us what the vision is and how to get there, we came with a very democratic vision, and we call it Bright Future, so that you as the resident should imagine what your future would be as a person and what the future should be of the group. And we practice, and we were criticized by that as well, by many scholars afterwards, identity politics, because they were saying we should have focused on the institutions. And the whole discussion and conversation was, well, a society does not only consist of institutions, it consists of people who organize themselves around identities. For example, I spoke with my good friend Aguilo. He's a diehard Barcelona fan. He has an identity with that soccer team, with that football team. So you reach out to him. There he is. You reach out to him and you talk about football and how we can, through football, through sports, create something new for our people. So that focus on these groups, and I learned in a presentation at the university last week, this brilliant student, PhD student of us, started talking about an incredible technique of how to identify nodes. And his major contribution was that he could identify through that techniques the direction of the nodes. I told him, wait a minute, when I was a politician, we used to call those spin doctors through the identity politics that we practice. So we knew through our reach out to the people who were the leaders in those groups. And we tried to reach out to them to give them that information so they could spread that information to us. But at that time, we didn't call them nodes because we didn't know. And so if an academician goes to a politician or a government and talk about nodes, of course, they will not connect. But if you talk, for example, about spin doctors, about leaders in the community and how to reach them and how to convince them, because they are not passive agents, then perhaps we can connect. Another interesting example is the following in terms of how we brought technology into the fore of the conversation, popular conversation. We didn't use big words in terms of how technology should become the most important thing in your life. What we said is action for us is very important, and it's another difference between a politician and an academician. If you go to an academician and you said, I need to have a solution today or yesterday, he will tell or she will tell you, well, it will take a year and a half in order to come up with something because I will need all this time to do a rigorous research for you. And that's a long time. So for example, in this particular case, we came with the idea that every household on the island should have a computer. Very simple. And that is how we started the conversation in the households about technology, why technology is important. So instead of talking about the future, about this very abstract level of thinking, we went directly to the household and made it very, very clear, immediate to them. Because everything you do in a government is immediate. You have only 4 years if you're a democratic government, right? So only 4 years. So you have, things are immediate. And action is of essence instead of time. What is also important and I think my time is almost up, but I'll share this with you, is the question of trust. When we made that change to tourism to service in 85, 86, we got a lot of recommendations from the IMF, World Bank, and so forth. And they said very simple, you know what you need to do? You need, because if you save, you're so small, you will never have enough money in order to make the move and all the investment, capital investment needed for tourism. So you need to bring in foreign capital. So we brought in foreign capital through a number of incentives. But some point after 5 years, we noticed that the economy was losing steam. It was not growing as fast as we thought it would be growing. So they kept saying, you know, throw in more capital investment. And we saw it continue to slow down, almost getting sometime in 1993, 1994 to zero. Then we realized it's like when you're making a pancake, you know, that at some point you say, you know, throw in more salt, because then you get a larger pancake. But what you're doing actually is you're making your pancake, you know, that tastes terrible. And instead of the physical capital that they were talking about, the foreign capital, it was very important to focus on the people, on what we call human development. And we changed the perception of human capital as an input of the production process of tourism and focus more on, you know, human development, to give this whole array and spectrum about respect for human being, inclusion, what the previous speaker was talking about, dignity. And what we did, what helped very much, is we democratized creativity. So instead of just one group, we start working a little bit like the universities in the States by providing grants and have open bidding for everybody to participate on a national level in order to get new ideas and so to accelerate the rate of new offerings. Today, the island has 40% of clean energy, and the intention is by 2025 they should have 100% clean energy. They're using wind, a lot of wind energy. And then 20% of the island is a natural park. So tourism has done a lot of good. It created scale, it brought in very, very quickly people with money, because the transient population had good discretionary money, and they're spending the money if you provide quality offerings. That is what we have learned. So in order to really, you know, have this conversation between the academicians and the politicians, it is very, very important, one, to understand what are the motivation, or what is the motivation of a politician. Understand power, that is very, very important, and don't have a demeaning posture because you're seeking power as it's something dishonest. It's very important in a democratic society, so that's crucial. Second, you need to have these building trust mechanisms, which is important. Third, understand the language. And fourth, know the nature of the work of a politician. Time and action and immediacy is very important. It's not so much, you know, a long time, but because they have only 4 years. Finally, what I would like to say just in closing, I had very good memories of a politician, and I think this is the first time that I have spoken in public about my experience as a politician. Maybe the day after tomorrow you will see on my brief bio that I was a politician. Thank you.
So Professor Norrie McBride has been awarded Distinguished Academic Enterprise Fellowship in Ulster University. His special interest is to develop student entrepreneurship. And he has assisted many students on the journey towards self-employment. I know we have a few students in this room, so I believe maybe he gets the time and you have the time to speak with him at the coffee break. Please welcome Professor Noor McBride.
I don't think the clicker is working, but hola, buenos dias. Thank you, first of all, to the committee for inviting me here today. It's always a pleasure to visit the beautiful island of Mallorca. If I can put it in context, first of all, I worked in the university in the business school up until 2 years ago, but half of my role was with Innovation Ulster Limited, which is a venture capital company which is embedded within the university. And when I left 2 years ago to go back into the private sector, I am still retained by the university on a regular basis to evaluate and de-risk spin-out companies and indeed spinning companies. To put it in context, Ulster is based in Northern Ireland. It's a population of 1.8 million. It's got 2 universities, Queen's University, which is part of the Russell Group, and Ulster, which has got 4 campuses, 24,000 full-time students, and 2,500 staff, of which 2,000 are academics. Northern Ireland, as you know, had many years of conflict, and in the first part of the 20th century, the first 50 years, we were renowned for having 3 prominent sectors: farming, textile manufacturing, and also shipbuilding. And one of our claims to fame is that we built the Titanic. But I can assure you, once it left Belfast, it was in fine working order. Okay, so one of the problems for governments when there are conflicts within civil society is to create stability. And to do that, the plan was, and which indeed is still there, up until recent times, was to create an enhanced number of the public sector employees. And this is the case because the sectors has moved away from the early 20th century and from manufacturing base to now a service sector, and many in the public sector. And as part of that commitment, and part of that intervention in particular, was to reinforce and fund the universities, which are very prevalent within our society and do a lot of good work in terms of the students. But like every university, it has a strategy, and Ulster has got 3 main drivers: teaching and learning, research, and academic enterprise. And academic enterprise is what I was involved in and still am, and that is to transfer the knowledge from inside the university to outside. And to do that, we use the triple helix model, whereby we seek collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and universities. But in many cases, not just in Northern Ireland or the UK or indeed Europe, the public or indeed companies and SMEs find it very difficult to engage with universities. It's very hard. So if I have an idea or a proposal or indeed a problem, part of a manufacturing process, how do I get that knowledge from the university to my company? Well, about 5 years ago, we set up the Gateway concept, and this was a process which is backed by government, and it was to act as a filter. So here we are. It was to act as a filter between the outside and inside. So every Wednesday afternoon, we would set up a clinic in each of the 4 campuses. We would advertise heavily in the local media and social media, and we would take appointments from companies and indeed individuals, entrepreneurs, and invite them into university. We have a cup of coffee and we ask them to explain their idea, and then we would filter that inquiry if we think it has merit. So we would contact the relevant faculty or department, and also we produced a register of academics who were proactive, if you like, in consultancy and indeed an academic enterprise. So we can match the inquiry to the academic. We then would track the inquiry on our CRM system to establish exactly where it was going and what are the issues that are there. And if it does become something which is suitable and relevant to the university, then we would then intervene and refer the applicant or the company to some financial interventions to help them resolve the problem. So that's been going on now for the last 5 years. At a typical afternoon, we would have 6 or 7 appointments at each of the campuses, and normally about 1 in 4 then translates into some interaction with the university. Okay, so as universities are the bedrock in any society for knowledge transfer, they produce the knowledge for our undergraduates and indeed postgraduates. We also have to have the link with the private sector for commercialisation, because in many cases they exploit the ideas that universities produce. And obviously we need governments as well to provide compliance and regulatory control on the many things that we do. But we have to go beyond the basic research. And Geoffrey mentioned early on how we measure things. Well, universities in the UK now are under considerable pressure because of Brexit, because many of our research programmes will be barred for us to participate in with our colleagues across Europe. So we now look for more private sector interaction to help us fund research and commercialise some of our ideas. And this is causing a problem for us, because we have, like many universities and indeed the Balearics, have benefited significantly from European funding to translate ideas and concepts into reality for the betterment of society as a whole. So for us, this is a real challenge at the moment. So for us, what we do for our companies is we look to enable them to build on their concept, if you like, and commercialise idea. But 15 years ago, we learned very, very quickly that we were giving too much of the good stuff away to the private sector. So we developed our own venture capital company called Innovation Ulster Limited. We put in £1 million to fund new startup programs, because when you take a new company concept to a bank, and the bank is asking for what is the return on capital employed, and they look at your projections, your P&L account for 1 or 2 or 3 years, and you're still making no money, then the high street bank is very reluctant indeed to fund that. So Innovation Ulster, to which I am still part of, we now provide and encourage companies with funding up to £250,000. So we produce and assist with the IP. We also file patents, and many of our companies now, in terms of where we've come from, are now having their products licensed under manufacturers, so we're attracting a royalty income. So to put that in context, last year we brought in about £600,000 in royalty incomes. On the consultancy side, up to the year end March 2016, we billed out net of VAT 1.2 million in consultancy services, and at the moment we've got 19 companies in our portfolio of spin in and spin out, which turns over £21 million, and we're employing 287 people on the ground. So we felt for us that developing our own venture capital company was the right way to go, and once it has traction over the early years, it now has deemed to be successful. The other way, because many of the ideas come from medicine and IT and engineering and biochemistry, the venture capital company is generic. And once we get to a certain threshold in the journey of the company over a couple of years, we will then go out to the marketplace and attract a specialist venture from perhaps the medical field who deals with big pharma, and they in turn then will employ some of their capital in return for some of our equity. So the get out for us is really a 5-year turnaround. So we expect to put in our capital day one to provide the mentoring and support services, to help with the patent renewal, help with ongoing research and development, which are allied to the principal product or service. And we stay with that company and we take a position on the board as a non-executive director, so we can have some element of control and governance as to how our money is being spent and allocated. And then in year 4, we look then for some way out in terms to get the university's money back out of the business again. And in many cases, through the option pools that we create with the academics or indeed the investors, we can then exercise options then to exit, which has been predetermined at the very outset of the plan. For us, this has been a highly successful model. It has created jobs. It has created the transition from research into commercialisation. And one of the things that we're under considerable pressure now is to look at the impact of research. For many academics, it is good to have papers published under peer review and to attend conferences like this. But for those universities within the UK now, the real impact is how are we going to be self-sustainable post-Brexit in a couple of years' time. And as you're probably aware of the media, that we have discussions around soft Brexit and hard Brexit. We are where we are at the moment, but the transition we hope will be a soft Brexit because we have made many friends in academia across Europe. But in closing, for us, I'd like to say that it's been a real pleasure coming here to Mallorca again, and I hope to present in a paper tomorrow which demonstrates the transition from some of the research and a collaborative arrangement with countries such as Iceland and Sweden and the Republic of Ireland, and how that collaboration has come to some tangible outcome. So all I can say is gracias por el sura mia presentación. Thank you very much indeed.